where no human being should be able to escape. He faces certain death at all kinds of different turns, and he always seems to find a way through. He's like an ancient MacGyver. Odysseus has survived 10 years on the front lines of a brutal conflict. He's anxious to get home to his country, but the Trojan War was nothing compared with what still lies ahead. Naturally, they had the odyssey just beginning. In Homer's Odyssey, the Trojan War is ended. Now, journey begins. Odysseus' island of Ithaca is 565 nautical miles from Troy. In ancient times, that was a journey of a few weeks. When Odysseus left Troy, he wanted to get home, but I don't think in any way he's expecting that it's going to take him 10 years to get home.
I think he thought that he might stop along the way to go on some raids, maybe to show off some success in a matter of a month or two. He had every reason to think he would be home in Ithaca.
Odysseus sets out from Ithaca with a fleet of 12 ships and a crew of 600 war-weary sailors. It is an impressive fleet by ancient standards. But could it have been his? 1988. Two scuba divers stumbled upon an unusual shipwreck off the coast of southern Sicily. The ship stretches nearly 60 feet long and 22 feet wide, making it the biggest ancient vessel of its kind ever discovered. But exactly how old is it? To find out, scientists analyzed the tree rings and wooden planks recovered by the divers. The results are stunning. The ship dates back to approximately 500 BC, within 2 centuries of the Odyssey. It's an exciting revelation. This could be exactly the type of ship Homer imagined for Odysseus. 2008. The entire ship is finally pulled from the Mediterranean Sea and dropped off in Portsmouth, England, to be studied piece by piece. Here, experts are able to compare the remains with Homer's description of how Odysseus' ships were built. The result is a perfect match. The interesting thing about this ship, as opposed to North European ships, is it's made of mortise and tenon and it's held together with rope. This is the same method of shipbuilding described in the Odyssey. Now, after 2.5 millennia at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, this ship is giving scholars an unprecedented glimpse into the world of Odysseus. This is not a primitive vessel. This is quite a sophisticated piece of technology. Odysseus' journey could well have taken place. And what's exciting about this is that we've got a ship that could well have been comparable to the ships that he would have been on. Odysseus is headed for home at last. His faithful wife Penelope and his now 10-year-old son Telemachus are eagerly awaiting his return. But in his absence, his palace has been overrun by lecherous men who are out to steal his wife and his throne.
Odysseus has been gone a while. Penelope, of course, is faithful, but she's surrounded by suitors, and they want to marry Penelope. And in marrying Penelope, of course, they want to have the power that goes with it and take over Odysseus' dominion. So it's not a good situation.
If Odysseus doesn't make it home soon, all that he fought for will be lost. Odysseus' first stop after leaving Troy is the coastal city of his heart. There, he will seek vengeance against an old enemy.
These were a group of people who had been allied with the Trojans. They helped the Trojans against the Greeks, and Odysseus wants to now exact revenge on him.
His Homer's may have been one of the settings in the Odyssey that was based on a real location. In ancient times, it was said to be home to the fiercest warriors in the known world.
They're absolutely terrific fighters, and their particular specialty was unconventional warfare. Great guerrillas and insurgents of the ancient world.
But that doesn't deter Odysseus. In the myth, he and his men come ashore, braced for battle.
They clobber the city, steal all the treasure, and they're on their way home. Of course, they make a mistake. They drink a little too much, they eat a little too much, and they pass out on the beach.
Their victory party is premature. Early the next morning, the natives ambush the men while they sleep. 72 sailors are massacred. The rest barely make it out alive. It is a hard lesson about underestimating the enemy, and the first of a series of deadly mistakes by Odysseus and his crew.
Get away. That's the better part of this force, but he loses a lot and learns a very painful lesson about keeping everybody on their toes at all times. This is going to be a very dangerous journey.
There's a theme in Homer that we might simply describe as always be prepared, never let your guard down. Again and again, we see people who have a little taste of victory and they immediately party. And their enemy, leaner, hunger for victory, takes advantage of it. This is a cycle we see again and again in the history of ancient, and I might say in the history of modern warfare as well.
Odysseus and his men are shell-shocked. They stay at sea for the next 2 weeks, but not by choice. The fleet encounters another devastating obstacle.
The storm blows them off. And from here until the very end of his adventures, Odysseus is kind of in never land.
The hurricane carries the fleet all the way to North Africa. There, on an exotic island just off the coast, Odysseus and his men unwittingly step into a mythological drug den. The natives here warmly welcome them with an offering of lotus, a sweet-tasting flower with mind-altering properties.
Odysseus is suspicious, and he's right to be wary of the situation because what happens when his men eat the lotus is that it's a kind of drug, and they become very happy and forgetful of what they're trying to do, which is to get home. They want to stay in the land of lotus eaters forever.
Some experts think the lotus eaters were meant to symbolize a real scourge of ancient Greece, drug abuse.
Greeks knew the pot. There are many Mycenaean seals and objects in which you clearly see the coffee, so they knew about opium and therefore hashish. Point being, human beings like intoxication. Within Odyssey, its function is to show how people can get lost on their way home. And that's very human.
Once again, the crew has been sidetracked by self-indulgence. It will become a running theme throughout the Odyssey. But their leader, Odysseus, stays sober. He has just one goal: to return home to Ithaca, where his wife and son are waiting.
He just says, come on, let's get back on the boat. And off they go. It's this incredibly short episode, and yet it's been written about so much. And I think the reason is because everybody knows that experience. Everybody's time. Everybody's been through too much. What could be more attractive? To eat, drink, smoke, ingest something that would just let you forget.
The journey home has begun again, but the crew's curiosity may yet be its death. across another island, teeming with wild game. It seems like a dream come true, but it's about to become hell on earth. Odysseus and his men have stumbled upon the land of a giant man-eating cyclops, and it's almost dinner time. The mythical hero Odysseus is trying to get back to his wife's son after a decade, but this is not the trip home he envisioned. After several weeks at sea, he has lost 72 of his men in an ambush and confronted hurricane wind that pushed him far off course. Now, an unknown island offers a chance to replenish both supplies and morale. So let's see.
There are a number of reasons why Odysseus would have to move to shore. One, they'd have to sea for a while. And you need to put ashore for supplies and provisions. The other thing that you always have to remember about Odysseus is he is just fundamentally curious.
Sometimes too curious for his own good. He wants to know. He's intrigued by knowledge. And so sometimes he pushes a little bit too far.
And there's such an insight into the Greek character here. This is a period of vast Greek expansion and colonization. The Greeks themselves, in Homer's day, wanted to go out in the world for many solid economic reasons, but also because they were simply curious.
Odysseus selects his 12 best men to explore the island. Just before he sets off, he grabs one last item, goatskin full of wine. It will prove to be a lifesaver. Priority number one, the explorers, is to find something to eat. Just offshore, the men hit the jackpot. They come across a cave filled with food. Only one thing is missing. The cave's owner.
Into the cave, Odysseus' men see wonderful stores of food, and they're ready to steal it and take off and get out of danger. Odysseus, though, is very curious. He wants to stick around. He thinks that the person that lives there should owe him a gift. And this is tradition in ancient Greek society, that a person who arrives as a stranger on someone else's shores is owed.
When a stranger shows up in your town, you take him in. You give him a place to rest. You give him food. You treat him kindly.
Inside the cave, Odysseus and his men help themselves to a long feast. As the sun sets, the man of the house quickly returns. But he is not what the sailors were expecting. He is a giant cyclops. A ravenous beast, the strength of 20 men, with one massive eye in the middle of his face. The sight of him sends Odysseus and his men cowering into a dark corner. The cyclops lights his knife on fire. Exposed.
Cyclops arrives home. He sees that these men have come in to steal his food. He's angry. And then Odysseus steps up and kind of beats his chest and says, "Oh, you just arrived from faraway lands. Where's our gift?" And he's being a little bit rude too. So you can kind of see how the Cyclops is a little bit hurt. This has all just gone terribly wrong.
Blink of an eye, the cyclops lunges forward, grabs two of the sailors, and devours them. He leaves not a morsel behind, not even the bones.
When the Greeks see the Cyclops eat two of their fellow Greeks, they're shocked, frightened.
Cannibalism in ancient Greece was an incredibly barbarous act. For them, a mark of a civilized person was actually the way they ate and drank.
Men are terrified. They're also frustrated with Odysseus for leading them into this ungodly mess. And they decide, well, while he's asleep, let's kill him. But Odysseus, fortunately, is the smartest guy in the bunch. And he says, we can't kill him.
Odysseus has a problem. If Odysseus kill the Cyclops now, they'll be trapped within the cave because they're not strong enough to move the stone on their own.
On the other hand, if the men don't kill the Cyclops, they will surely die. It is a hopeless situation, but Odysseus has overcome too much to give up now. If he can't use his strength to beat this monster, he'll use his intelligence.
He never gives up. Even though his men in the Cyclops cave feel it's over, Odysseus is always scheming, planning, thinking.
The giant Cyclops is one of mythology's most memorable monsters. But could it be more than just a figment of Homer's imagination? Today, some experts think it was inspired by a real-life beast. And this may be the proof. The mythical hero Odysseus and his men are facing all but certain death inside the cave of the monstrous Cyclops. Two have already been eaten, and the beast is hungry for more. At sunrise, the Cyclops devours two more men. Then he heads out to graze his sheep, sealing the cave behind him. Time is running out for Odysseus. The mastermind of the Trojan horse desperately needs a new stroke of genius. And fast.
Odysseus is someone who survives on his wits. But what makes Odysseus different than all of the other mythic characters is that he thinks before he acts. He's likely to come up with a cunning solution rather than a direct one.
So goes the myth. But what is the link to reality? The giant Cyclops seems like the work of a disturbed imagination, but it may be based on actual science. There are three very different facts of ancient life that could have inspired Homer's monster. The first is a rare disease that causes fetuses to develop only one large eye. It's a condition called cyclopia, and it may have been widely known to the ancient Greeks.
Exposure to certain sorts of alkaloid toxins that are found in some herbs can cause pregnant women to deliver children that have cyclopia. This is very interesting because some of those herbs that happen to have these dangerous compounds happen to be ones that ancient Greek medical men prescribed to their patients.
Cyclopia results when these toxins prevent the brain from developing properly.
As a result, instead of having two separate eye sockets, you get one big one. You have a Cyclops birth. And this could serve as a kind of inspiration for legends about these one-eyed creatures that roam the earth.
But it's also possible that Homer's Cyclops was inspired by something much bigger. A volcano. In the myth, Odysseus describes the Cyclops as a man mountain, bearing head and shoulders over the world.
It's very possible that the ancient Greeks, looking at erupting volcanoes like Mount Etna, might have looked at that huge, angry red eye of the volcano as it erupted hot rocks and lava, and they might have pictured a sort of monstrous man mountain, single eye that was angrily raging at mankind.
But there is one more potential real-world inspiration for the Cyclops. Fossils dug up by ancient archaeologists.
The ancient Greeks were all extremely interested in the natural world, and they collected lots of specimens of everything. And of course, they did find samples of fossils out in the wild as well. Now, if you look at the skull of an elephant, it's a pretty impressive thing because there's a huge opening right in the middle of the forehead. The actual eye openings look relatively small in comparison and are shunted off to the side. So if you didn't know what it was, you might very easily imagine that this was the skull of some sort of gigantic one-eyed creature.
odyssey continues. Odysseus and his men are hostages of King Cyclops. Unless something changes fast, they will always be. But Odysseus remains focused.
There's a great fear that surrounds the entire episode, and the men around him tend to fall apart under this fear. Odysseus never does. He realizes in a very cold, calculating, rational way that these emotions will only get in the way. Will only get in the way of his escape and the solution of the problem. He focuses always on the problem and only on the problem.
While the Cyclops is out tending the sheep, Odysseus spots the massive wooden plug he left behind and gets an idea. With the help of his men, he shaves the narrow end to a fine point, finds it all in play, and waits. As night falls, the Cyclops returns. He snatches two boar's arrows and eats them alive. As the dust settles, Odysseus steps forward with the wine he brought from his ship. He offers it to the Cyclops. He downs one, then another, and a third. Instantly, he begins to tear.
Some people might think when they hear that the Cyclops has a couple of glasses of wine and then passes out on the floor that he must have been a real lightweight. He didn't really have any tolerance for alcohol. The truth is that ancient wine was a lot stronger and a lot harsher than wine is today.
In antiquity, there was very strong wine, you might even call it fortified wine, that had a very high alcohol content. And typically what one would do is measure it out and then dilute it with water to be an appropriate drink at a dinner. The wine that Odysseus gives to the Cyclops is an entirely undiluted form.
As the drunk giant stumbles around the cave, he asks Odysseus his name, and gets a clever answer.
Odysseus says, oh, well, my name is Nobody. At that point, there's no way that any of us can quite realize how this will fit into the plan, but it's been part of Odysseus' plan all along.
With that, the Cyclops crashes to the floor and passes out. Odysseus springs into action. With the help of his men, he lifts the very stake, charges forward, and plunges into the eye of the beast.
Screams of the Cyclops inside of his cave. The other Cyclopses come around and ask him, what's going on inside of there? We hear your screams. Something horrible must be happening. The Cyclops at that point answers, nobody is hurting me. Nobody is harming me. And the neighbor Cyclopses then scratch their heads and say, well, I guess nobody's hurting him. I guess we'll go back to bed.
So this trick that Odysseus has actually kind of put in place earlier on in the story by not giving his real name but by saying his name was Nobody, we now see it comes to fruition.
The wounded Cyclops opens the doorway in a blind rage. Odysseus sees his opening and makes his move.
The Cyclops is sitting in front of the door, and Odysseus doesn't let them in, try to creep out. He knows the Cyclops. He doesn't let them ride the sheep out because he knows he's going to be clever enough for that. He ties them beneath the sheep.
As dawn breaks, the sheep head out to pasture, with Odysseus and his men clinging to their underbellies.
The Cyclops is not entirely a fool. He knows that the Greeks might be trying to escape from his cave, but as the sheep pass by, he feels each one on top. The Greeks are underneath. Doesn't feel them underneath. Odysseus' escape from the Cyclops cave is the perfect example of brain.
It's Jack and the Beanstalk. It's David and Goliath. It is the sneaky little guy defeats the big dumb guy. These much, much bigger obstacles that we face, this brain of ours can overcome. It's this fundamental story that is absolutely core to humanity.
Odysseus is a master of deception. but he hasn't yet mastered his own pride. As his ship sails away from the coast, he can't resist revealing his own true identity. It's a mistake that will haunt him for years to come.
The Cyclops is standing there cursing him. Suddenly, Odysseus almost inexplicably turns and says, "You want to know who I am? I am Odysseus, son of Laertes."
Now, to us, that seems like a really stupid move. But the most important thing for a Greek hero was something called klaus, fame. So it was your fame, your reputation that really mattered. So one thing that Odysseus is doing at that moment is really making sure that he gets credit for what happened.
The Cyclops is blinded and beaten, but he has one last hope for revenge. His powerful father. It turns out the Cyclops is a son of the sea god Poseidon. He intends to make Odysseus magic. Mythology's greatest mortal, Odysseus, has been lost at sea for more than 2 months. He's desperate to get home to his kingdom and his family, but he's not close.
All the other heroes that are still alive from the Greek force of Troy have made it home. Only one is not home yet, and that's Odysseus. He's literally the last hero on the sea.
From the outset, Odysseus' return voyage has not gone according to plan. He has come face to face with a lethal heartbeat and a bloodthirsty Cyclops, and been driven hundreds of miles off course by hurricane wind. Times like these would crush the spirits of most men. Odysseus isn't most men.
One of the things that I think makes Odysseus such an appealing character is really every challenge that comes along, he treats as just an obstacle to be overcome.
Now Odysseus must confront his most terrifying obstacle yet. The Cyclops he just blinded and escaped from is the son of one of mythology's most powerful gods. The master of the seas. Poseidon.
The Cyclops asks his father, the god Poseidon, to take vengeance on Odysseus, to kill him, or if not to kill him, to make the rest of his trip a living hell.
By attacking the son of a god, by attacking the Cyclops, who's the son of Poseidon, he makes a double mistake. One is he angers a god, but the second is he angers the god of the sea. He's sailing home.
Odysseus now faces 2 daunting challenges. Survive Poseidon and get home another man steals his wife. As the days and weeks pass, the suitors courting Penelope grow older or brazen.
The locals realize that here is this wonderful, beautiful, capable woman, Penelope, and she's all alone. She also happens to be sitting atop a store of great wealth. So there are many people who try to vie for her affections.
But Penelope still clings to the hope that her husband is on his way home.
She still believes that Odysseus is coming home, and she is willing to do everything in her power to make sure that his throne is still available for him when he returns.
A few days after surviving the giant Cyclops, Odysseus encounters someone who can help him get home. On the island of Iolia, he meets a king named Aeolus.
King Aeolus has a special power. He has control over the winds. He's able to regulate and control which way the winds blow.
King Aeolus secretly gives Odysseus a present, a bag containing all the winds that could blow him off course. As long as that bag remains closed, He'll have smooth sailing all the way back to Ithaca.
This is an enormously important gift for ancient travelers. It's the equivalent of him giving Odysseus a fleet of jet planes. Winds are the motive power of ancient shipping. So this is a very great gift because the winds can bring you home.
For 9 days and nights, the Greeks sailed straight for Ithaca, aided by favorable winds. Finally, Odysseus is on his way home. He stays awake the whole way, working his ship round the clock. On the 10th day, Ithaca appears on the horizon. But in the last mile, fatigue finally overcomes the hero. As Odysseus dozes, his crew seizes the chance to find out the mysterious bag.
His men immediately decide there's gold, there's silver, there's treasures, and Odysseus doesn't want to share it with us.
They want to kill themselves. So curiosity, tinged with a bit of greed, leads to their activity.
With the shores of Ithaca in plain sight, they open the bag, and the Poseidon curse is unleashed with a vengeance. In seconds, Odysseus' hopes of getting home are destroyed. Movements immediately drive his fleet back to Ionia. This time, he won't get any help from the king.
Odysseus says to Aeolus, "Can you help us again?" Aeolus says, "No, you are clearly cursed by the gods. It could not have been easy for you to get home, given what I gave you. If you didn't get home, some god has an offer you. I'm not messing with that. Go on your way."
It's another painful setback for Odysseus, but he wastes no time worrying about what might have been.
He may be knocked down just as much as all the rest of us, and even harder than all the rest of us. He always can get back up. He can always find a way.
Odysseus' ability to persevere is put to the test again, just days after he leaves Ionia. His fleet pulls into a mysterious harbor and gets attacked out of nowhere by a race of giant cannibals. Odysseus loses hundreds of men and ships. These run red with blood. Once again, Poseidon curse is devastating its crew.
When Odysseus left Troy, did not think that this was going to be an epic journey home. I don't think he could ever have imagined the kind of journey and the kind of troubles and adventures that he found.
For Odysseus, the adventures are just beginning. The rest of his journey home presents challenges more daunting than any man has ever faced. But the story of Odysseus continues. Our mortal hero is a marked man. Poseidon has put a bounty on his head. Each day, his crew and his chances will diminish until Odysseus finds himself alone. One man against all odds. One goal. Get home before it's too late.
Don't give me anything. Thank you. All right. Okay, so if we're looking at compare contrast, for instance, with the Cyclops, what would you put? What is it like? What does it talk about the Cyclops in the story, and then how was it different in the movie that we just watched? We're not going to answer it right now. I'm just giving you a for instance so that you understand what you're supposed to do. So let's discuss it a minute here. What were the differences in this movie from what you read in the book? I see Elspeth, I see Carson, I need to hear from other people. Jacob, tell me some similarities and differences. What were meant to be the differences? How did they talk about the Cyclops that was different in this movie that we just watched than what they said in the book? James, what do you have?
In the book, they tried to be
Okay. The escape method was a little bit different. Jack, what do you have?
In the book, is the Cyclops like way bigger? Or
I don't know about that. What do you have, Ryan?
Wasn't it that Odysseus got like the best fudge out of all of them?
Okay. Grace, what do you have?
that in the book, the log, they describe it, but that was it from Athena, and then the movie, Cyclops, like, had it.
The what?
So, like, it's that they used to poke out his eye.
Okay, they talked about the stick. Elspeth, what do you have?
Okay. Oh, so when the Cyclops came, he actually ran out of help for all the other Cyclops. The other Cyclops in the show, they came to him. In the book, he called out and they said, "Why are you making graphic night?" They never for him.
Okay. Carson, what do you have?
In the book, the rock in front of Cyclops' front is like a big kind of square flat slab, but in the movie it's kind of a more woolly type stone.
Okay. Anybody got anything else? How do they explain what the Cyclops might be in the movie? Elspeth?
Like they found like a skeleton.
Yeah, elephant or a giant mammoth.
Yeah.
Actually, in ancient times, they knew. I mean, the digging up of dinosaur bones and mammoth bones and all that stuff was not something new to early, to modern archaeology. They've been digging these bones up since ancient times. They just thought they were the bones of giants. So they looked at that mammoth skull and thought, what else did they think aside from the mammoth skull? What else might have inspired it? Grace, what do you have?
Like how some people were just like born with one eye.
Yeah, like a birth defect. It's like Cyclopean birth. And they said one other thing. Remember what the other thing was, Beta?
Okay.
The volcano, maybe. The giant one eye, maybe it's a metaphor. Cyclops is a metaphor for a giant volcano. So that's the stuff that you would put that are, I mean, everything else that you said, I mean, you noticed those little details and that was good. But I think the biggest things would be, what was, how, in modern times looking back, how might these people have thought that a Cyclops actually happened? Versus in the story, I mean, this is Poseidon's son, right? It's a living, like, real thing. Please keep your mouth over your nose. Thank you. Do not want COVID, please, especially new variant COVID. So does that make sense how you do this? All right, so in this next one, I think this is where we get the explanation of things like Scylla and Charybdis and the discussion of the land of the dead and things. Okay? So what do you think they're kind of trying to do?
how do we type this into it?
What?
Do you add a text box to type it, or?
I'm just
It should be text boxes. You should just click your cursor in the text box and just type in it. Will you double check this?
Yeah.
This thing, make sure you got it.
It's
Scott
not.
Carson.
It's not what I meant. I meant like, what can we type? Like, do we just like do bullet points or?
Yeah, bullet points.
Bullet points. Okay.
Yep.
Because a lot of Greek mythology comes from actual the Greek being interpreted and so beyond.
Yeah, definitely. So they're trying to kind of scientifically take a modern scientific filter and look back on it and see what they might have been looking at to make them come up with this stuff. I don't know. Maybe Cyclops monsters did exist at one point. But if they did, we haven't found evidence of them. So who knows? It's interesting, you know, we more and more with archaeology, they're finding things. I don't know if you guys have read this, but they're finding like species of little people that lived that were, you know, at the same time as human beings. Yeah. In caves, in deep caves and different things, like in Indonesia, and I want to say a place like, not the Ukraine, but like Slavic areas, that kind of thing. So there's different digs and there's different legends and myths about little people existing with human beings. So kind of some of this is keep an open mind. Do you understand what to do? Are you ready for the next one? And we'll get through probably most of the next one. It might go a little bit into our next class period. We'll see. You don't have to worry about doing it outside of class. But if you need to rewatch, there's the links. Okay?
His name is Odysseus. He's on a mission to return what the woman he loves before she marries someone else.
We might get to this, so we'll go to 11.
Yeah.
Can't figure it out yet?
Yeah.
In? Okay, do it. Get it all typed in there, and if you need help next time, we'll have you format it.
Okay.
And perhaps one of the Christian Gospels. This is the real story, as it was written. The odyssey. The story of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, does not like tales of other mythological heroes. He's not a god with special superpowers. Instead, his character is written as a man, bright, white, soft.
Everybody can live in the sky. This is all of us. Lifespan. That's Odysseus' story.
The sea is not just a return. It's a race against time. As Odysseus battles danger on the high seas, his wife, Philip, anxiously waits his return and wonders if she's become a sailor's widow. Meanwhile, Luke's gathering soon as nothing, pressuring her to get the husband and marry him. She wins the conflict in the crowd. If Odysseus doesn't recall in time, he loses his family and his kingdom.
Aristocracy of the area starts saying, Odysseus isn't coming home. Don't know what happened to him, but he's not coming back. So we need to decide who's going to be king instead of him. The person who would be a candidate would be the person who marries Penelope, since everyone assumed that she was married to them.
Odysseus' struggle to get home in time is the central focus of the Odyssey. This epic myth was the Greek author's most famous work. And to the ancients, it was more than just entertaining fiction. It was a guide to living in a dangerous world.
We do understand to tell stories to make sense of them. And
So do we kind of just like say they said this, and then this is how they said it in the book? The book is more like this is that, and then this is more kind of explained.
Odysseus' adventures on the high seas reflected context beyond the shores. This myth was written at a
represents someone who's very, very prototypical Greek. Greece at the time was a very poor country. It's a rocky place, surrounded by the sea. So people had to make their fortunes by being adventurers. It was the only way you could make adventurers.
Odysseus' heroic journey home began with his departure from Troy, where he had spent 10 years fighting the Trojans. He had hoped to return to his home island of Italy quick within days, but for hidden soldiers, it turned into a trip from heaven. On a stop for supplies several weeks off the journey, Odysseus narrowly escaped death at the hands of a man-eating cyclops, only to go back to the monster's home. A powerful sea god, the sun.
By attacking the son of a god, he makes a double mistake. One is he angers a god, but the second is he angers the god of the sea. He's sailing home.
That's the curse that is working against Odysseus the entire rest of his journey. Poseidon, one of the most powerful gods, has this personal antipathy to Odysseus.
Now Odysseus is right on course. Months into a journey that should have taken weeks. Little does he know, he's got years still to go. Odysseus does not want to surrender to the peace of adversity.
Knocked down just as much as all the rest of us, and even harder than all the rest of us. He always can get back up, and he can always find a way. And I think that really crystallizes this desire that all of us have to make it through, to persevere.
He's just a human being, up against all kinds of odds, up against gods. He has to make it through, simply on his intelligence.
Desperate for an escape from Poseidon's stormy seas, the hero and his men made landfall on a coastline overflowing with food. Odysseus sends a scouting party to investigate, while he stays close to shore. The men discover a stone palace surrounded by wolves and lions. There they meet the beautiful sorceress, Circe. For these Greek warriors who have been out at sea for the past 4 months, she's a stirring sight. And so are her maids. Circe invites the men into her home to join a sumptuous feast of food and flesh.
Circe is supposed to show us what happens when men get led astray, not by drugs, but by sex. And men coming home, you've got a sexy woman with great power that makes you happy, give you anything you want. What does that do? It turns men into pigs.
As Odysseus' men indulge their appetites, the sorceress teaches them a hard lesson. She literally transforms the men to swine.
I wonder if this is like the origin of the whole chauvinist
One man
like
manages to escape Circe's
concept.
and returns to warn Odysseus.
Wonder if it existed before that
He
particular
sets out to
analogy.
confront the goddess.
He has this almost optimism about the way things are. He has this idea that any challenge that comes his way, he can overcome. And he never really seems to falter in that.
According to the myth, on the way to Circe's palace, where his men turned into pigs, Odysseus crosses paths with a magical ally, the ancient Greek messenger god, Hermes.
He's often the god who is sent from Mount Olympus down to Earth to perform errands, essentially. He's sent to Odysseus with a drug called mole. Don't really know what this was, but it has mystical powers. He gives it to Odysseus, and Odysseus takes it so that he's actually not subject to Circe's power.
Ancient storytellers may have referred to holy milk and inspired the phrase we know today. With the power of his holy protection, Odysseus swaggers into Circe's palace. Circe tries to turn him into a pig, but fails. So she changes tactics. She lures him into the bed. But Odysseus plays hard to get.
Odysseus responds, not so fast. Before I agree to this, you have to promise to turn my men into human beings. You have to promise no more play business, no more turning any of us into animals. And Circe agrees to these terms.
With that, Odysseus enters the inner sanctum of the sex goddess. And doesn't come out for a whole year.
This to us seems like an extramarital affair. Homer doesn't really seem to think that this is a problem in any way. This likely has to do with the double standard in society. That is to say, women were expected to be chaste and loyal, not to seek or enjoy sexual relationships, whereas men could go out and have really a lot of different extramarital affairs without anybody knowing it.
After 1 year, Odysseus decides enough is enough. He's had his tryst, but his heart is with his wife, Penelope. And he must get home.
I think at this point, the Odyssey is trying to show us something about Odysseus. He is a man like any other. He should be striving to get home. He owes Penelope, and he owes Ithaca, a king. And the longer he spends with Circe, the more he is denying what is owed.
But before he can set sail on his home island, he'll have to make another detour, visit a place that isn't on the map. But we is a harrowing chapter. Odysseus' journey that some scholars believe is one of Christian gospel. Odysseus, the mythical hero in Homer's Odyssey, has been away from his family and kingdom for almost 12 years. He spent a decade fighting the Trojans, and a full year with Circe, the sex goddess. Now he knows the time has come to move on and get home. Circe consents to his leaving, but imparts an ominous warning. To overcome the curse of the sea god Poseidon and get home, you'll need instructions from the blind prophet, Tiresias. Just one problem. Tiresias is dead. Odysseus must now make an unplanned stop in the underworld of Hades.
It's horrified at this thought. No human's ever gone to Hades and survived.
But Odysseus has no choice. Poseidon's power over the seas is strong. He's getting nowhere fast. If he ever hopes to reclaim his family and his kingdom, he must seek out Tiresias in the underworld. To end life, saw him differently.
Ancient Greek underworld was mostly characterized by sleep. In contrast to later ideas that come from Christianity, the underworld as being some eternal punishment. It's not a kind of nasty, hot, fiery frenzy. Instead, what we've got is a gray area that's difficult to see. It's misty, murky, and very far away.
Odysseus makes a harrowing descent into Hades. The agonized cries of perished souls echo from the sides. Inside Hades, he comes face to face with Tiresias. Explains that Odysseus and his men can overcome the wrath of Poseidon if they follow his instructions.
Tiresias gives very specific things. Above all, what you need to do is not the cabin of the sun god Hades. No matter what else you do not eat this cattle.
His advice that will come to haunt Odysseus. As the souls of the dead begin to close in on him, Odysseus makes his escape from the underworld, more determined than ever to get out. He has done no living man is supposed to be able to do. Survive the trip to Hades. So goes the myth, but what is the link to reality? Some scholars believe this chapter of Odyssey influenced one of Christianity's most sacred texts, the Gospel of
You need to be paying attention
It's almost
so that
impossible to
you can
overestimate
do this
the
assignment
importance
and
of
get
all
points.
for ancient Greeks.
So sit quietly
Of course,
and
as a
watch.
Greek speaker, the Gospels are written in Greek.
So I'm looking at
He
you.
almost
You're
certainly
going
would
for all
have
the
known the
stuff
story of the
now.
Odyssey. So if there are things in the book of Mark that remind us of the Odyssey, that may well not be an accident.
A close comparison of the Odyssey and the Gospel of Mark reveals some shocking parallels. Both stories revolve around the hardships of a suffering hero, Odysseus and Jesus. Both main characters have carpentry backgrounds. Odysseus was a skilled woodworker. He even built his own palace in Ithaca. Jesus was the son of a carpenter, and in one passage in the book of Mark, he himself is referred to as the carpenter. But the most intriguing connection is the similarity between Odysseus' visit to Hades and Jesus' last days on earth. Both stories begin with a banquet. Odysseus and his men feasting at Circe's palace. Jesus and his apostles at the Last Supper. Then, as their comrades sleep, both men agonize about their impending encounter with death.
When Odysseus learns from Circe that he needs to go to Hades, he despairs. But the reason is, and he says so, that no mortal has ever gone to Hades and returned. Jesus is about to die. He has the Last Supper with his disciples. He spares life because he knows he must face the cross.
Ultimately, Odysseus would travel to the underworld of the dead and return. Jesus would die on the cross and then rise to could these parallels be coincidence? Odysseus leaves Hades and sets sail for Ithaca. He is finally on his way to death. But in his path lurks another obstacle. The island of the Sirens.
The sirens are these creatures whose songs are so good that they pull you off course and you shiver.
Odysseus knows he is approaching the island